The neighborhood I lived in was the kind of place where appearances mattered more than anything else. Every driveway shimmered with spotless SUVs, sleek sedans, and even the occasional luxury sports car, all freshly waxed and meticulously cared for. The people here didn't just own cars, they displayed them like trophies. Each shining hood, each spotless rim reflected not just the wealth of the owner, but their sense of pride and identity. And then there was me. In the middle of this perfection sat my car, an old battered sedan that looked more like a relic than a mode of transportation. Its paint, once a deep navy blue, had long since faded into a patchy mixture of gray and rust. The driver's side door groaned every time it opened, and the exhaust coughed black smoke like an aging chain smoker struggling through cold mornings. The seats were torn at the edges, the dashboard rattled over every bump, and the sound system had long given up the fight. But it worked. It started every morning. It got me to my job, the grocery store, and back home. That was enough for me, or at least it should have been. At first, I brushed off the stares. I told myself people didn't really care. But the glances grew sharper, the whispers louder, the smirks more obvious. Neighbors out for their evening walks would slow down just enough to give the car that look, the kind of look that said, "Why is this thing still here?" Children passing on their bikes would giggle, sometimes pointing as they sped by. And then came the comments. At neighborhood gatherings, they slipped in like barbed jokes, delivered with smiling faces but stinging all the same. Still driving. "That antique?" someone would laugh, raising their glass of wine. Another time, a man across the street, proud owner of a brand-new black SUV, made sure his voice carried as he shouted to a friend, "I'm shocked that thing still runs. Must be held together with duct tape and a prayer." Laughter followed, echoing across the block like a cruel chorus. Each word, each smirk, each joke added another layer of weight to my shoulders. I began leaving earlier for work, sliding quickly into the driver's seat before too many eyes could fall on me. When the engine sputtered to life, I felt as though the whole neighborhood was listening, mocking, judging. Even delivery drivers pulling up in their shiny vans would glance at my car with a smirk as if they couldn't help themselves. For a long time, I told myself it didn't matter. I wasn't here to impress anyone. A car was just a car, and mine still did its job, but the truth was the humiliation was starting to eat away at me. Pride is a fragile thing, and mine was being chipped away piece by piece. There were moments at night, lying awake in bed, when the voices of my neighbors replayed in my head like a cruel soundtrack. I began to imagine them gathered together, laughing at me the way school children laugh at the odd one out. My car had become more than just a vehicle. It had become a symbol. To them, it represented failure, stagnation, being stuck in the past. And slowly, I began to believe it too. What hurt the most wasn't just the mockery. It was the fact that I couldn't ignore it anymore. No matter how many times I told myself it didn't matter, I could feel the weight pressing down. Every dent in the car felt like a dent in my pride. There came a day when the humiliation reached its breaking point. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was washing the car in the driveway. Not to make it shine, it hadn't shone in years, but simply to keep the dirt from making it look even worse. I was bent over, scrubbing at the front bumper, when I heard laughter from across the street. A group of neighbors had gathered, chatting, near one of their gleaming cars. One of them pointed toward me, and though I couldn't hear every word, I caught enough. Why even bother washing it? It's like polishing trash. The laughter that followed was like a knife. My hands froze on the sponge, my stomach tightened, and I felt a heat rise in my chest that wasn't from the sun. I stood there for a moment, water dripping from the sponge, trying to pretend I hadn't heard. But inside, something shifted. That was the moment I decided. I didn't just want a new car, I needed one. Not because my old car couldn't run, not because I wanted to keep up with the neighbors, but because I wanted to silence the laughter, to take back my pride, to prove to every smug face in that neighborhood that I was not someone to be mocked. I wanted something that would not just blend in, but stand out. Something that would turn their laughter into stunned silence. Something that would make them choke on every cruel word they had thrown at me. And in that moment, scrubbing at the old paint of my tired sedan, I made a promise to myself. I would buy a new sports car. It wouldn't be tomorrow. It wouldn't be next week. But I would do it. No matter the cost, no matter the sacrifices, no matter how long it took. I would roll into this neighborhood in a machine so beautiful, so powerful, so dazzling that the same mouths that once mocked me would fall silent in awe. And deep inside, for the first time in a long while, I felt a spark. It wasn't anger anymore. It was determination. The old car had carried me far, but its final purpose, I realized, was not just to get me to places. Its purpose was to carry me to this moment, to light a fire inside me that would change everything. The mockery had fueled me, and I was ready to turn that fuel into something greater than anyone could imagine. The journey had just begun. After that Saturday afternoon, I couldn't look at my old car the same way again. It still sat faithfully in the driveway, waiting to serve me as it always had, but every time I glanced at it, I no longer saw a vehicle. I saw every smirk, every laugh, every whispered comment that had haunted me for years. The decision to buy a new sports car had been made in a moment of heated humiliation, but once the fire cooled, reality set in. Sports cars were expensive. Far. More expensive than anything I had ever bought in my life. I wasn't rich. I didn't have a trust fund or a high-paying job that allowed for reckless spending. I had savings, yes, but not enough for the kind of car I envisioned. And so the first question echoed in my head. How? The how became an obsession. I pored over numbers late into the night. I calculated my expenses, cut out unnecessary costs, and built a plan that bordered on ruthless. Gone were the little indulgences, dining out, weekend getaways, impulse shopping. Every dollar saved became fuel for my mission. My friends noticed the change quickly. Invitations to dinners or nights out were politely declined. I became a shadow of my old self, consumed by the thought of what was to come. But saving money wasn't enough. Not at the pace I needed. If I wanted a car that would silence the mockery and light the neighborhood on fire with envy, I had to do more. I took on extra work, late-night freelancing, side hustles, anything that could bring in even a modest income. Sleep became a luxury. My days were a blur of office work, evenings hunched over freelance projects, and weekends delivering packages or doing odd jobs. It wasn't glamorous, but every deposit into my growing account felt like another brick laid in the foundation of something greater. Every dollar was a step closer to the moment I envisioned, rolling down the street in a car that screamed success. The obsession wasn't just financial, it was emotional. I spent hours researching cars, scrolling through endless forums and watching review videos. I devoured articles about horsepower, torque, handling, and luxury interiors. I studied brands the way a student studies textbooks before an exam. Was it going to be a Porsche? A Corvette? Maybe even a Lamborghini if I could stretch far enough? Each option tantalized me with possibilities, each image fueling the hunger inside me. And yet, it wasn't only about the machine, it was about what the machine represented. Every polished curve, every roaring engine, every flicker of sunlight on a glossy hood meant more than performance specs. It meant pride, respect, victory over those who had mocked me. It meant proof that I wasn't the person they thought I was. As months passed, people noticed my absence at gatherings. The jokes about my car grew fewer, not because they had stopped mocking, but because I was no longer around to hear it. Still, I imagined their laughter every time I walked by, and it only hardened my resolve. There were nights I sat in my old sedan, parked alone under the streetlights, imagining what it would feel like when it was finally gone. I pictured the neighbors' faces when I replaced it with something sleek and untouchable. I pictured their silence, the way their eyes would Follow me when I pulled into the neighborhood in a roar of horsepower and luxury. It wasn't easy. The sacrifices weighed on me. There were moments when I questioned if it was worth it. Moments when exhaustion whispered that I should give up, that no car was worth the sleepless nights and endless work. But then I'd remember that Saturday afternoon. The sting of their laughter, and I knew giving up wasn't an option. Slowly, my account grew. What once seemed impossible began to look within reach. I visited dealerships, not to buy yet, but to fuel my determination. I walked through rows of shining machines, running my hand along the smooth metal, inhaling the intoxicating scent of leather interiors. Salesmen greeted me with polite but skeptical smiles, as though they saw only a man who didn't belong in such a place. I didn't argue with them. I let them believe what they wanted, because I knew what was coming. One evening, after months of grinding and saving, I sat at my desk staring at my bank account. The numbers had finally reached the threshold I had set for myself. It wasn't easy money, nor was it careless. It was blood, sweat, sacrifice, and endless determination made tangible in digits on a screen. My chest tightened, my heart raced, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to smile. The next morning, I walked into the dealership not as a dreamer, but as a buyer. My eyes scanned the polished rows until they landed on it. The sports car that seemed to embody everything I had worked for. Its glossy paint glistened under the showroom lights, each curve sculpted like art, each detail whispering of speed and power. I stood before it, my reflection distorted on its flawless surface, and I felt the weight of every sacrifice lift. Signing the papers was surreal. My hands trembled as I wrote my name, every stroke of ink sealing not just a purchase, but a victory. The salesman, who had looked at me with doubt before, now wore a forced smile of respect. The keys felt heavy in my hand, a small piece of metal that represented so much more than ownership. When I slid into the driver's seat for the first time, the world shifted. The leather embraced me, the engine purred beneath my feet, and for a brief moment, all the laughter, all the humiliation, all the years of mockery vanished. It was just me and the machine, a union forged by sweat and fire. Driving it out of the dealership, the roar of the engine thundered through my chest, and I knew the road ahead was mine. But more than the road, it was the moment I had been waiting for. Because soon, I would bring it home. Soon, the same neighbors who had mocked me would see, and the silence that followed would be the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The drive back from the dealership was unlike anything I had ever experienced. For years, I had been used to the wheeze and rattle of my old sedan, the way it lurched forward with reluctance, like it resented every mile I asked of it. But now, it was different. The sports car responded to every touch with precision. The engine roared like a living beast, eager and unchained, the steering sharp, the acceleration smooth yet explosive. With every press of the pedal, I felt a surge of power that went beyond horsepower. It was the power of transformation. As the city streets blurred past me, I couldn't help but imagine the moment that awaited me back in the neighborhood. I pictured their faces, those same neighbors who had laughed, mocked, and dismissed me. I imagined the way their conversations would falter when they heard the growl of this machine echoing down the street. For years, I had been the silent target of ridicule. Today, I would be the center of awe. The sun was beginning to set as I turned down the familiar road toward my home. The sports car's paint glistened under the fading light, reflecting streaks of orange and red from the sky above. My heart pounded as I slowed near the entrance of the neighborhood. This was it, the moment I had sacrificed so much for. As I rolled past the first few houses, curtains shifted. A couple of neighbors paused mid-step during their evening walks. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. The deep, throaty growl of the engine was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just a car. Arriving, it was an announcement, a declaration that the old narrative had changed. The further I drove, the more attention I drew. Children who had once pointed and laughed at my sedan now stood frozen, their eyes wide with wonder. Their bikes slowed as they tried to keep pace, but this time there was no giggling, only awe. Then came the adults, the same people who had mocked me before, who had let their jokes cut into me at barbecues and block parties, now stood on their porches, silent. Some crossed their arms, pretending not to care, but their eyes betrayed them. Others whispered to each other, trying to hide their surprise. And then there were those who couldn't hide it at all, their jaws slack, their heads tilting as if to confirm they weren't imagining what they saw. I pulled into my driveway with deliberate slowness, savoring every second. The roar of the engine echoed one last time before I shut it off, and silence fell across the street. For a moment, I just sat there, my hands resting on the wheel, my heart racing. This was it, the victory I had envisioned, made real. Stepping out of the car, I felt taller, stronger. The polished surface of the sports car gleamed beside me, a mirror reflecting not just my image, but the countless hours of sacrifice, determination, and fire that had led me here. I didn't need to say a word. The car spoke for me, louder than any defense I could have given in the past. The neighbors tried to hide their reactions, but it was impossible. One man across the street, the same one who had once joked loudly about my duct tape and prayer car, stared with narrowed eyes. His shiny SUV suddenly looked ordinary, unimpressive in comparison. He muttered something under his breath and turned back toward his house, his pride wounded. A couple who lived down the block walked over slowly, their expressions painted with a mix of forced smiles and thinly veiled envy. "Nice car," one of them said, the words dragged out as though they pained him to admit it. I simply nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of my lips. There was no need for arrogance, no need for gloating. The silence, the stares, the envy, they were enough. As the evening settled in, I found myself sitting on the porch, gazing at the car parked proudly in my driveway. The glow of the streetlights danced across its curves, and every time I looked at it, I felt the weight of the past lifting. All the humiliation, all the years of mockery, all the whispers and laughter, they were nothing now. They belonged to a chapter of my life that had closed the moment I turned the key in that sports car. But victory has a strange way of opening new doors. Over the next few days, the neighborhood shifted. Where once there had been smirks, now there were cautious compliments. People stopped me to ask about the car, what model it was, how fast it could go, what it cost. Some asked casually, pretending it was idle curiosity, but I saw the envy burning in their eyes. For years, I had been invisible, a target of ridicule. Now, I was suddenly the center of attention. It wasn't just attention from neighbors either. Driving through the city, I noticed how strangers turned their heads, how people admired the car at red lights, how the roar of the engine made others glance in awe. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't carrying shame, I was carrying pride. Yet with pride came something else, temptation. The attention was addictive. The more people noticed, the more I wanted to show off. I found myself taking longer routes home just to be seen, parking in places where the car would draw eyes, revving the engine just enough to turn heads. It wasn't just about silencing the laughter anymore. It was about feeding a hunger I hadn't realized was inside me. One evening, as I pulled into the neighborhood, I caught sight of a group gathered around the car in my driveway. Neighbors, who had once avoided me, now stood close, examining the machine with fascination. Their voices carried admiration, their expressions unguarded. For a moment, I felt a surge of satisfaction unlike anything before. But deep down, I wondered, had I really silenced the mockery, or had I simply replaced it with envy? Had I proven them wrong, or had I only given them something new to talk about? The car gleamed under the fading sun, beautiful and untouchable. But behind its shine, I could feel the stirrings of something darker. This wasn't just about respect anymore. This was about power. And once you taste power, it's hard to let it go. The neighborhood had changed, yes, but so had I. And the road ahead, I realized, was only just beginning. The weeks that followed were unlike anything I had ever known. The sports car had transformed me from the neighborhood outcast into the unexpected centerpiece. Every time I pulled out of the driveway, heads turned. People who had once whispered behind my back now nodded politely or waved, their tones dripping, with a forced friendliness that hadn't been there before. At first, it was intoxicating. The same voices that had mocked me now spoke with admiration, or at least the appearance of it. "That's a beauty," they'd say, circling the car with eyes wide, as if every curve and detail were a piece of art. Children who once pointed and laughed now stared in awe, their bikes slowing whenever I drove past. Even the man with the black SUV, who had been the loudest voice of mockery, avoided eye contact when I passed by. His silence was the sweetest victory. But victory is a strange thing. It doesn't satisfy. It hungers. And as the admiration rolled in, I found myself craving more. The car wasn't just a vehicle anymore. It was a stage, and I was the star. I began to seek out opportunities to flaunt it. I took long drives through the busiest parts of town, rolling the windows down so the roar of the engine could echo off the buildings. I parked in front of trendy cafes and watched as strangers snapped photos when they thought I wasn't looking. At night, I cruised through the city lights, the car gleaming like liquid fire under the street lamps. Every glance, every stare, every moment of envy fueled the fire inside me. Yet the deeper I sank into the glow of attention, the more I began to realize something unsettling. The car hadn't changed who my neighbors were. It had only changed how they looked at me. Beneath the smiles, beneath the compliments, I still sensed the envy, the bitterness. I could almost hear their thoughts. Who does he think he is? How could someone like him own something like that? The laughter was gone. Yes. But in its place was something sharper, something colder. And it didn't escape me that the same people who had mocked me for being less now resented me for daring to be more. The realization struck hardest one evening when I hosted a small gathering at my house. It wasn't something I did often, but with the newfound attention, I thought perhaps it was time to open the doors and let them see more than just the car. I parked it proudly in the driveway, polished to perfection, its curves glowing under the porch lights. Neighbors came, smiles plastered across their faces, drinks in hand. They laughed, they complimented, they pretended. But I could feel the tension under their words, the envy tightening their voices. Conversations circled back to the car again and again. What model it was, how much it cost, what it felt like to drive. No one asked about me, about my life, about the sacrifices I had made. To them, I wasn't a person anymore. I was the car. When the night ended and the guests left, I stood in the quiet of my driveway, staring at the machine that had brought me here. It was beautiful, powerful, everything I had dreamed of. Yet, for the first time, I felt a hollow ache inside. The laughter had been silenced, yes. But respect? Real respect? That was something different. Respect couldn't be bought with horsepower or painted onto a glossy hood. Respect came from who you were, not what you drove. It was then I realized the true irony. The neighbors had once mocked me because they believed the car defined me. And now, after everything, after all the sacrifices and long nights, I had let the new car define me too. The difference was that this time, I wasn't laughing either. Over the following days, I thought deeply about what it all meant. The sports car had given me power, yes, but it hadn't given me peace. The mockery was gone, but the emptiness remained. I had spent months sacrificing, burning myself out, chasing an image that I thought would heal me. But in truth, it had only changed the shape of the wound. One evening, as I sat behind the wheel, engine humming softly, I closed my eyes and listened. For the first time, I realized that the silence I craved had never been about my neighbors at all. It had always been about me, about the silence inside my own heart, the ability to live without caring about the voices around me. The old car hadn't been the enemy. The mockery hadn't even been the true problem. The problem was me, the part of me that believed their voices mattered more than my own. The sports car was mine now, a symbol of determination, sacrifice, and resilience. But it was also a reminder that pride built on the opinions of others is fragile, fleeting. True pride comes from within, from knowing who you are, regardless of whether the world laughs or applauds. The next morning, I stepped outside to find the usual cluster of neighbors lingering nearby, pretending not to stare. I slid into the sports car, the leather cool against my skin, and started the engine. The roar was as powerful as ever, but this time I didn't drive to be seen. I didn't rev the engine to draw eyes or slow down for admiration. I simply drove. The road stretched out before me, open and endless. And for the first time since the laughter had begun, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not victory, not pride, but peace. Because in the end, it was never really about silencing them. It was about finding my own silence. And in that silence, I finally found freedom.